The story of television is not a tale of a single eureka moment, nor the work of one lone genius toiling in an attic. It is a sprawling multi-generational epic, a grand symphony composed by a disparate chorus of inventors, tinkerers, physicists, and visionaries spread across continents. It is a story of ideas whispered across decades, of parallel discoveries, of fierce legal battles, and of a final triumphant flicker of light that would forever change the fabric of human society. This is how we conjured ghosts in the machine, how we learned to capture light and sound and fling them through the air to be reborn in a box in our living rooms. The philosophical seeds of television were sown long before the technological means existed to cultivate them. The desire to see at a distance, to project an image from one place to another, is an ancient dream, but the true genesis begins in the latter half of the 19th century, a period crackling with electrical innovation. The invention of the telegraph had proven that information could be transmitted instantaneously over wires. The telephone then added the human voice to this miracle. The logical, tantalizing next step was the image. If sound could travel, why not sight? The first critical breakthrough was the discovery of the photoconductive property of the element selenium by Wolfgang Smith in 1873. He found that selenium's electrical resistance decreased when exposed to light. This was monumental. It meant that light could be translated into an electrical signal. A variable light pattern could become a variable electrical current. The eye for the machine had been discovered. Almost simultaneously, the invention of the Nupka disk in 1884 by the German engineer Paul Gottlob Nupka provided the first practical, though mechanical, method of scanning an image. This was a simple, brilliant device, a spinning disk with a series of holes arranged in a spiral pattern. As the disk rotated, each hole would scan a successive tiny line of the image, allowing light from that line to fall upon a selenium cell. The cell would then convert this sequential sliver of light into a fluctuating electrical signal. At the receiver, a synchronized Nupka disk and a light source modulated by the incoming signal would theoretically reconstruct the image, line by line. Nupka never built a working model, but he had provided the fundamental blueprint. The concept of breaking an image down into a rapid sequence of lines, a principle that would remain central to television for nearly a century. For the next 40 years, the field was dominated by these mechanical television systems. Pioneers like John Ludja Budd in Scotland and Charles Francis Junkins in the United States took up the mantle of the Nupka disk. Budd, a dogged and resourceful inventor, was the first to achieve true televised images of moving objects. In 1925, in his crude London attic workshop, he demonstrated the transmission of a recognizable, flickering human face. His system was a Rube Goldberg-esque assembly of sewing needles, old bicycle lenses, tea-chests, and Nupka discs cut from cardboard. The images were faint, ghostly, and composed of only 30 lines, but they were undeniably pictures transmitted through the air. By 1927, he was transmitting television signals over telephone lines between London and Glasgow, and in 1928, he made the first transatlantic television transmission. Budd's mechanical television was a marvel, a proof of concept that captured the public's imagination, but it was a technological dead end. The limitations of spinning discs and mechanical inertia meant the images were small, dim, and hopelessly low resolution. A different path was needed. That path was electronic television, and its foundational stone was laid not in an inventor's workshop, but in a university laboratory. In 1897, the German physicist Carl Ferdinand Brunn invented the cathode ray tube, CRT. This was a glass vacuum tube with a narrow neck and a wide, flat screen at one end. Inside the neck, an electron gun would fire a narrow beam of electrons towards the screen, which was coated on the inside with a phosphorescent material that glowed when struck by the electrons. By using magnetic or electric fields, the beam could be steered to paint a moving point of light on the screen. Brunn saw it as a scientific instrument, an oscilloscope, for visualizing electrical waveforms. He could not have known he had just created the heart of the future television receiver. The crucial leap was to use this electronic beam not just to trace a line, but to scan an entire image. The man who first conceptualized this was a teenage prodigy. In 1908, a 15-year-old boy named Fulla Taylor Funsworth, while plowing a field on his family's Idaho farm, looked at the parallel lines of freshly turned earth and had a vision. He realized that an image could be dissected by an electron beam moving line by line, just like the plow traversing the field, and then reconstructed at the other end by an identical synchronized beam. He sketched his idea for an image dissector camera tube for his high school chemistry teacher. The drawing, scrawled on a blackboard, would later become critical evidence in a monumental patent battle. While Funsworth nurtured his idea, another inventor was working independently along similar lines. Vladimir Zworykin, a Russian immigrant who had studied under Boris Rosing, a pioneer who had experimented with using a CRT as a television display as early as 1907, was employed by the giant Westinghouse Electric Corporation in the United States. In 1923, Zworykin filed a patent for an all-electronic television system he called the Okonuska. It was a camera tube that was more practical and sensitive than Farnsworth's initial image dissector design. The iconoscope used a mosaic of photosensitive cells that would store electrical charges proportional to the light hitting them. An electron beam would then scan this mosaic, discharging each cell and creating the video signal. Zworykin then famously approached his bosses at Westinghouse, who were unimpressed. The story goes that he was told to go and invent something useful. The race was now on. Farnsworth, operating with a small team and limited funding in a San Francisco laboratory, successfully demonstrated the first fully functional all-electronic television system on September 7, 1927. The first image he transmitted was a simple straight line burned onto a glass slide. When it appeared on the receiver screen, one of his assistants asked, "When are we going to see something?" Farnsworth replied, "You just did." He had proven his concept. His financial backer, George Plusson, asked when they could expect to see financial returns. Farnsworth, with the unwavering confidence of a visionary, reportedly said, "We might be ready in about 2 years to put on a demonstration for the public. It wouldn't be until the 3rd or 4th year that we could expect any returns." He was, as it turned out, wildly optimistic about the timeline. Meanwhile, Zworykin had moved to the Radio Corporation of America (RCA), a behemoth led by the formidable David Sarnoff. Sarnoff, a visionary in his own right, saw the potential of television not just as a novelty, but as the next great mass medium, a logical successor to radio. He gave Zworykin the vast resources he needed, declaring, "I want to see television, and I want RCA to be the first to bring it to the public." When Zworykin visited Farnsworth's lab in 1930, ostensibly as a fellow researcher, he saw the working image dissector tube. He reportedly told Farnsworth, "This is a beautiful instrument, I wish I had invented it." Back at RCA, the mission was clear: develop a commercial television system and, if necessary, circumvent or crush Farnsworth's patents. What followed was one of the great corporate versus individual patent wars of the 20th century. RCA, with its army of lawyers and immense financial power, launched a protracted legal assault on Farnsworth, claiming that Zworykin's earlier, more rudimentary patent took precedence. The key moment came during a patent interference hearing. The critical piece of evidence was the drawing Farnsworth had made for his high school teacher, Justin Tallman. Tallman testified, producing the original sketch from his files. The date on the drawing was from 1922, predating Zworykin's work. The evidence was incontrovertible. In 1934, the U.S. Patent Office awarded priority of invention for the electronic television system to Philo Farnsworth. It was a stunning victory for the lone inventor against the corporate titan. Sarnoff was forced to negotiate, and RCA eventually licensed Farnsworth's patents. With the legal battles subsiding, the technological development accelerated. Both RCA and Farnsworth's team, along with other companies like Philco and Dumont, refined the camera tubes and receivers. The number of scanning lines increased from the paltry 30 or 60 of the mechanical systems to 441 lines, providing a much sharper image. The introduction of the kinescope, a CRT designed specifically for television display, gave birth to the familiar television set. The first public demonstrations were sensations. At the 1939 New York World's Fair, RCA televised President Franklin D. Roosevelt's opening speech, and a few hundred sets were put on sale to the public. The age of electronic television had officially dawned. But then, just as it was finding its feet, television was put on hold. World War II erupted, and the manufacturing might of the United States was redirected to the war effort. Television research was classified and applied to new technologies like radar. It was a pause, not an end. When the war concluded in 1945, the pent-up technological energy and a booming post-war economy created the perfect conditions for a television explosion. The factories that had built radios for the troops now retooled to build television sets. The networks that had dominated radio broadcasting, NBC, CBS, ABC, began building their television divisions. The late 1940s and early 1950s were the golden age of television. Programming was live, often broadcast from New York City. It was a time of experimentation and immediacy. Families gathered around their large furniture-like consoles with small, round screens to watch everything from Milton Berle's Texaco Star Theater to the gritty dramas of Playhouse 90. The coronation of Queen Elizabeth II in 1953 was a landmark event, watched by millions on both sides of the Atlantic, truly forging a global village. The invention of the videotape recorder by Ampex in 1956 freed television from the constraints of live broadcasting, allowing for editing, syndication, and the preservation of programs. Subsequent decades brought a cascade of refinements and revolutions. Color television, a concept that had been demonstrated by Baird and others as early as 1928, became a commercial reality in the 1950s, thanks largely to the work of RCA, which developed a compatible system that could be received in color or black and white. The transition was slow and expensive, but by the mid-1960s, color broadcasts had become the standard for primetime programming. The screen grew larger and flatter. The solid-state transistor replaced the bulky, hot vacuum tube, leading to smaller, more reliable and eventually portable sets. Then came the satellites. The launch of Telstar in 1962 enabled live transatlantic broadcasts, shrinking the world even further. The moon landing in 1969 was watched by over 600 million people around the globe, a collective human experience made possible by the television. Cable television, initially a solution for bringing clear signals to remote areas, evolved into a universe of hundreds of specialized channels, fracturing the mass audience but expanding choice. The final great transformation was the shift from analog to digital, culminating in the flat-panel displays of the 21st century, LCD, plasma, and OLED, which finally banished the deep, heavy cathode ray tube to history. The invention of television was not a single act of creation. It was a chain reaction. It was Nipkow's spinning disc, Braun's glowing tube, Farnsworth's plowed field, Zworykin's iconoscope, and Sarnoff's ruthless ambition. It was the convergence of physics, engineering, business, and human desire. It was a tool for education and a vessel for entertainment, a window to the world and a mirror to our culture. We invented television by learning to see the world not as a whole but as a series of lines, a stream of electrons, a sequence of ones and zeros. We learned to capture light itself, to send it on a journey, and to make it dance again on a screen, forever altering our perception of time, space, and our own place in the world. Of course, the story of television's invention does not conclude with its commercial launch. In many ways, that was merely the end of the first act. The device that began as a piece of furniture, a flickering hearth in the post-war living room, was destined for a transformation far more profound than any of its early pioneers could have imagined. The quest was no longer just to transmit an image, but to perfect it, to color it, to shrink it, to connect it, and ultimately to make it the central nervous system of global culture. The first great challenge after commercialization was the pursuit of color. The dream of color television was almost as old as television itself. John Logie Baird had demonstrated a primitive mechanical color system as early as 1928 using spinning discs with colored filters. But an all-electronic color system was a puzzle of immense complexity. It required a method to not only capture and transmit the varying intensities of light as black and white did, but also to capture and transmit its hue. The solution, conceptually, was simple: break down the image into the three primary colors of light, red, green, and blue, transmit them separately, and then recombine them at the receiver. The practical execution, however, was a nightmare. The Columbia Broadcasting System, CBS, developed the first serious electronic color system. It was ingenious but had a fatal flaw. It was incompatible with the existing millions of black and white television sets. The CBS system used a rotating color wheel inside both the camera and the receiver. It would sequentially transmit red, green, and blue fields. A black and white set trying to display this rapid sequential signal would see only a jittery, unwatchable mess. In 1950, the Federal Communications Commission, FCC, bowing to the technical achievement, surprisingly approved the CBS system as the color broadcast standard for the United States. This posed an existential threat to RCA and its leader David Sarnoff. He had staked his company on the future of television, and he would not cede the next revolution to a competitor. He tasked Vladimir Zworykin and his team with an all-out, no-expense-spared mission: develop a compatible color system. The goal was Herculean. The color signal had to be broadcast in such a way that a black-and-white television would interpret it as a normal black-and-white picture, while a new color set could decode the additional color information from the very same signal. The breakthrough came from a team of RCA engineers led by a man named George H. Brown. They developed the shadow mask cathode ray tube. This was a marvel of precision engineering. Inside the color picture tube were 3 electron guns, one for each primary color. The screen was not coated with a single phosphor but with an intricate mosaic of millions of tiny red, green, and blue phosphor dots. Placed just behind the screen was a thin metal plate, the shadow mask, punctured with precisely aligned holes. The geometry was so exact that the electron beam from the red gun could only strike the red phosphor dots, the green beam only the green dots, and the blue beam only the blue dots. The 3 beams, scanning in unison, would paint the picture in full color. The transmitted signal was a complex encoding of the color information chrominance within the existing black and white signal luminance. A black and white set simply ignored the color information and displayed the luminance signal. It was compatible. After a brutal, high-stakes technical showdown before the FCC, RCA's compatible system was adopted as the new national standard in 1953. The first RCA color televisions went on sale in 1954, but they were astronomically expensive, prone to failure, and had a notoriously dim picture due to the shadow mask blocking most of the electron beams. For over a decade, color television was a luxury item, a novelty. It was broadcast programming that finally pushed it into the mainstream. In the mid-1960s, networks realized color could sell. NBC, owned by RCA, led the charge with vibrant shows like Bonanza and The Wonderful World of Disney. When CBS, the last holdout, began broadcasting its popular The Lucy Show in color in 1968, the transition was complete. The American living room, once a monochrome world, had erupted into full-spectrum color. As the picture gained color, the set itself began to change form. The deep, heavy cabinet required by the long cathode ray tube was a space-consuming beast. The first revolution in form factor was the transistor, replacing the power-hungry, heat-generating vacuum tubes with tiny, cool, reliable solid-state transistors in the 1960s allowed for the creation of the first truly portable televisions. These small-screen sets, often with a carrying handle, liberated television from the living room and placed it in the kitchen, the bedroom, or the backyard. They made television a more personal, intimate medium. The next revolution in display technology was the slow, steady march toward flat panels. The CRT had reached its physical limits. The dream was a screen that could be hung on a wall like a painting. The path to this future was paved not with electron guns and vacuum, but with liquid crystals. The phenomenon of liquid crystals had been discovered in the late 19th century, but their application to displays began in the 1960s. It was discovered that by applying an electric field to these strange materials that had the fluidity of a liquid and the molecular order of a crystal, their optical properties could be manipulated. They could be made to block or transmit light. The first practical liquid crystal displays, LCDs, were monochrome and found in calculators and digital watches. But the technology advanced rapidly. The development of active matrix technology using a thin-film transistor TFT for each individual pixel allowed for the creation of large, high-resolution, full-color screens. By the 1990s, laptop computers were using LCD screens. It was only a matter of time before the technology was scaled up to challenge the television market. The first flat-panel LCD and plasma televisions were prohibitively expensive, but by the early 2000s they began their rapid conquest. They were thin, light, energy-efficient, and could be made in much larger sizes than was ever practical with a CRT. The age of the monumental, furniture-like television console was over, replaced by a sleek, black pane of glass. Parallel to this evolution of the physical object was a revolution in its delivery. For decades, television signals had traveled through the air, received by rooftop aerial antennas. This was terrestrial broadcasting. Its range and quality were limited by geography and weather. The solution, pioneered in the 1940s and 50s, was community antenna television, CATV, which would later be known simply as cable. Initially, it was a rural solution. A large, master antenna would be placed on a high point to get a clear signal, and that signal would be piped via coaxial cable to subscribers' homes. But cable operators soon realized they could do more than just retransmit local channels. They could import distant signals and, most importantly, create their own. This gave birth to the cable network. In 1980, a channel dedicated entirely to news, CNN, launched. It was derided as the chicken noodle network by skeptics who could not imagine a 24-hour news cycle. Its success proved that niche, specialized programming could attract a loyal audience. MTV revolutionized music and youth culture. HBO, using another new technology, the satellite to distribute its signal, pioneered subscription-based, commercial-free television and proved that the small screen could produce content with the production value and maturity of film. The three-network monopoly of NBC, CBS, and ABC was shattered. The mass audience fragmented into a million target demographics. The final and perhaps most profound technological shift was the convergence of television with the computer. The analog signals that had defined television since its inception were about to be rendered obsolete by the digital bit. Digital television offered perfect picture and sound quality, immunity to interference, and, crucially, the ability to compress the signal. Compression standards like MPEG-2 allowed broadcasters to squeeze multiple channels of programming into the bandwidth previously occupied by a single analog channel. These were multicast channels. More importantly, digital television was data, and data could be manipulated, stored, and interacted with. This led to three earth-shattering developments. First, the digital video recorder DVR, like TiVo, which freed viewers from the tyranny of the schedule, allowing them to time-shift their viewing and skip commercials with ease. Second, high-definition television (HDTV), which, with its wider screen and vastly increased number of scanning lines, 1080 versus 441, offered a picture of stunning clarity and detail, making the television experience more cinematic than ever before. And third, the internet. The line between the computer monitor and the television screen began to blur. Initially, web TV was a clumsy attempt to bring the internet to the living room, but the true revolution was the rise of streaming. Companies like Netflix, which began as a DVD-by-mail service, saw the future. They began streaming their content over the internet on demand. YouTube gave a global platform to user-generated video. The concept of appointment television eroded further. Why wait for a show to air at a specific time when you could binge an entire season in a weekend? The modern television is now an app, a portal. The physical screen is a dumb terminal, a window that can call up content from a global network of servers. We no longer tune in, we select. We have moved from a broadcast model to a narrowcast model, and now to a pointcast model, where every individual's viewing experience is unique and curated by algorithms. So the story of television's invention did not end in 1927 with Farnsworth's line, or in 1953 with RCA's color standard. It is a story that is still being written. We invented the television, but then we had to reinvent it again and again. We gave it color, we flattened it, we connected it to a web of global information, and we made it intelligent. From the ghostly, 30-line mechanical image to the on-demand, ultra-high-definition streams of today, the journey of television is the story of our relentless drive to capture, share, and experience our world in ever more immediate and vivid ways. It is the story of how we built a looking glass, and in doing so, forever changed the reflection we see of ourselves. The story of television, therefore, is not a linear path but a vast, branching river delta, with countless streams feeding into the mighty flow that reshaped the cultural landscape. To continue is to explore these tributaries, the philosophical shifts, the global collaborations, the unintended consequences, and the future vistas that this most influential of inventions has opened. The box in the corner did not just show us programs, it began to reprogram us, altering our politics, our social structures, and our very perception of reality. The rise of television as a dominant medium in the 1950s and 60s created a new form of shared experience, a global village, as theorist Marshall McLuhan famously termed it. For the first time in human history, a significant portion of a nation's population could witness the same event, hear the same words, and share the same laughs at the same moment. This created a powerful, unifying cultural glue. The televised presidential debates between John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon in 1960 demonstrated the medium's newfound political power. Those who listened on the radio often felt Nixon had the upper hand, but the television audience, witnessing Kennedy's youthful poise and Nixon's pallid, sweaty discomfort, perceived a clear winner. Image, henceforth, would be inextricably linked with substance in the political arena. Television became the primary stage for national triumph and trauma. The assassination of President Kennedy, the funeral procession of Sir Winston Churchill, the first steps on the moon, these were not just news items. They were visceral, collective rituals experienced in real time, etching themselves into the consciousness of a generation with an immediacy no newspaper could ever achieve. However, this power to unify also held the power to divide and to expose. The civil rights movement in the United States found a powerful, if unintentional, ally in television news. The stark, black-and-white footage of peaceful protesters in Birmingham being assaulted with high-pressure fire hoses and police dogs was beamed into living rooms across the nation and the world. The brutal reality of segregation could no longer be ignored or dismissed as a regional issue. Television brought the struggle into the open, forcing a national conversation and galvanizing public opinion in a way that print journalism alone could not. Similarly, the Vietnam War became known as the Living Room War. Nightly news broadcasts brought the chaos, the violence, and the human cost of a distant conflict to the American dinner table. The graphic footage challenged official narratives and fueled a growing anti-war sentiment, demonstrating television's capacity to act as a check on power and a catalyst for social change. As television's influence grew, so did the sophistication of its language. The early stage-bound broadcasts gave way to a more cinematic grammar. Shows like The Avengers in the UK and Mission Impossible in the US utilized dynamic editing, creative camera angles, and location shooting, borrowing techniques from film to create a faster-paced, more visually engaging experience. This evolution culminated in the work of auteurs who saw the potential of the serialized format. In the 1980s, David Lynch's Twin Peaks was not just a show. It was a national obsession, a weekly puzzle box that demonstrated television's capacity for complex, long-form narrative, a quality that would later be hailed as one of its defining strengths in the golden age of the 21st century. The globalization of television technology and content was another critical chapter. While the US, the UK, and Japan were early leaders, the development of television was a global endeavor. The Soviet Union had its own robust broadcasting system, a tool for state propaganda but also for cultural education. Countries around the world developed their own broadcast standards, PAL in much of Europe and the Commonwealth, SICAM in France and the Eastern Bloc, creating a fragmented but diverse technological landscape. This led to a vibrant international trade in programming. British comedies like Fawlty Towers found cult followings in America. Latin American telenovelas became a cultural phenomenon across Southern Europe and beyond. Japanese anime, initially exported as cheaply dubbed children's fare, evolved into a sophisticated global art form. Television became a window not just to domestic life but to the cultures and stories of the entire world. Yet for all its power to inform and connect, television also drew criticism for its potential to pacify and manipulate. The term couch potato entered the lexicon, encapsulating fears of a sedentary, intellectually disengaged populace. Social scientists began studying the effects of television violence on children. Advertisers became masters of psychological persuasion, using the intimate nature of the medium to create desires and build brand loyalties from a young age. The concept of spin emerged in politics, where the visual narrative crafted for television could often outweigh policy substance. Television was accused of shortening attention spans, of prioritizing sensationalism over depth, and of creating a culture of celebrity that valued fame over achievement. It was a classic double-edged sword, a tool for enlightenment and a weapon of distraction. The digital convergence, which began with the shift from analog to digital broadcasting, accelerated into a full-blown revolution with the advent of broadband internet. The television set, once a simple receiver, became a smart portal. This was the final dismantling of the old model. We were no longer passive viewers on a schedule dictated by network executives. We became active users, curators of our own entertainment universes. Streaming services like Netflix, Amazon Prime Video, and Hulu operated on an on-demand model, but their greater innovation was algorithmic curation. Using vast datasets of viewing habits, these platforms could recommend content with unnerving accuracy, creating personalized channels for every individual. This hyper-personalization has its own societal implications, potentially creating filter bubbles where we are less exposed to challenging or divergent viewpoints, our tastes constantly reinforced by a digital echo chamber. The very definition of a television show has been transformed. The binge-watching model, where entire seasons are released at once, has changed narrative packing and structure. Shows are now writ to be consumed in marathon sessions, with cliffhangers designed for a 3-minute pause rather than a week-long wait. Furthermore, the global nature of streaming platforms has created a new form of simultaneous global release. A series like Squid Game from South Korea can become a worldwide sensation overnight, transcending language and cultural barriers in a way that was impossible in the era of territorial broadcasting rights. Looking forward, the invention of television continues. The current frontiers are defined by immersion and interaction. Virtual reality, VR, and augmented reality, AR, represent the logical endpoint of television's quest for total sensory engagement. Instead of watching a screen, the viewer is immersed within the environment. This promises an even more profound level of empathy, walking in the shoes of a refugee in a documentary, for instance, but also raises new questions about desensitization and the blurring of reality. Interactive storytelling, as seen in experiments like Black Mirror, Ben Kesnich turns the viewer into a participant, making narrative choices that alter the plot. This is a far cry from the passive family gathered around the Fulka in 1952. From the spinning Nupka disc to the immersive metaverse, the journey of television is a testament to human ingenuity and our insatiable desire to share our stories and see ourselves reflected. We invented a machine to transmit pictures, and in doing so we invented a mirror for our entire civilization. A mirror that shows us our triumphs and our failures, our beauty and our absurdity, our deepest truths and our most entertaining fictions. It amplified the best and worst of humanity, connected the globe, and reshaped the rhythm of daily life. The invention was not a moment but a process, a continuous reinvention that is still unfolding, pushing the boundaries of how we see, what we know, and who we are together. The story is not over, the next channel is always waiting to be tuned. The narrative of television, therefore, is a chronicle without a true conclusion, a perpetual state of becoming. To continue its history is to examine not just the evolution of a technology, but the metamorphosis of a societal organ. We have moved from the era of the television as a monolithic piece of furniture to the age of the television as an invisible, pervasive intelligence, a content cloud that follows us from the living room wall to the smartphone in our palm. This final phase of our story explores the dissolution of the device itself and the profound, often disquieting, implications of a world perpetually tuned in. The physical object, the television set, which for decades was the focal point of domestic life, began its slow fade into obsolescence. The flat-screen panel, once a marvel of minimalism, now seems almost quaint in its tangibility. The real revolution was the decoupling of content from the dedicated receiver. The operating system became the new television. Platforms like Google TV, WebOS, and Tuzan turned the screen into a dumb terminal, a mere window for software that aggregated all streams of content. The channel was replaced by the app. We no longer watched ABC. We watched a show on the ABC app, or more likely on the Hulu app, which housed ABC's content. This shift transferred immense power from network programmers to platform owners, and crucially, to the algorithms that govern these platforms. This algorithmic curation represents the most significant and subtle transformation in the history of television. In the broadcast era, a small group of executives decided what the nation would watch. In the cable era, hundreds of niche channels offered choice, but the schedule was still king. In the streaming era, the schedule is annihilated, replaced by personalized infinite scroll. This is television as a bespoke service, a universe curated for one. The implications are staggering. It has created a culture of hyperspecialization, where two people in the same household can have entirely different television diets, sharing no common cultural touchstones. The Watakala moment, where a nation discussed the plot twist in Dallas or The Sopranos, is now a fractured phenomenon, occurring in niche online forums and social media groups rather than in a shared public sphere. This algorithmic isolation can reinforce biases and create epistemological bubbles, where our worldview is constantly validated by the media we consume, selected for us by a machine designed to maximize our engagement, not our enlightenment. Concurrently, the very nature of production and distribution was upended. The gatekeepers of the three major networks were first challenged by cable and then utterly dismantled by the streaming revolution. The barrier to entry for a channel plummeted. Anyone with a camera, an idea, and an internet connection could become a broadcaster. YouTube, Twitch, and TikTok are the ultimate expression of this democratization. They represent a return to television's chaotic, experimental roots, but on a global, instantaneous scale. Here, the line between producer and consumer, between celebrity and audience, is not just blurred, it is erased. This has given rise to new forms of creativity, new stars, and new communities. However, it has also created a vast, unregulated wilderness where misinformation can spread with the same velocity and production value as legitimate news, and where the economics of attention reward extremity and algorithmic gaming over substance and craft. The business model of television underwent a parallel deconstruction. The advertiser-supported model that funded broadcasting for half a century is in crisis. The 30-second commercial spot, once the undisputed king of marketing, is being rendered ineffective by the skip button and the binge watch. In its place, a confusing mosaic of new models has emerged. Subscription-based SVOD like Netflix, advertising-based AVOD like Tuba, and hybrid models. The new gold rush is for intellectual property and global subscriber bases, leading to a frantic consolidation of media companies, Disney's acquisition of Fox, the merger of Warner Media and Discovery, and a streaming war characterized by astronomical content budgets and unsustainable customer acquisition costs. This has led to a new paradox: infinite choice but finite time and wallet share, resulting in subscription fatigue for the consumer and a frantic scramble for a profitable formula for the corporations. This brings us to the present frontier and the next probable leap: the complete integration of artificial intelligence and generative media. We are already seeing the early tendrils of this future. AI algorithms are used to recommend content, but soon they will be used to create it. Imagine a television that doesn't just show you a story, but generates a unique narrative for you in real time, adapting plot points and characters based on your demonstrated preferences. A detective show where you choose the suspect to pursue, and the story restructures itself around your choice, not from a pre-written branching path, but from an AI's infinite generative capacity. This is the endgame of personalization, a television experience that is not just curated but created for an audience of one. Furthermore, the convergence with augmented and virtual reality promises to complete television's journey from a window on the world to a portal into another reality. The screen will dissolve into a pair of glasses or a neural interface. We will not watch historical documentaries. We will stand on the streets of ancient Rome. We will not see a sports game from a camera angle. We will experience it from the perspective of the quarterback. This represents the ultimate fulfillment of television's original promise to see at a distance, but it also raises profound philosophical questions about the nature of experience, reality, and our attachment to the physical world. From the ghostly mechanical silhouette captured by Baird's spinning disk to the potential for AI-generated immersive realities, the story of television is the story of humanity's relentless drive to externalize its consciousness, to project its dreams and fears onto a canvas larger than itself. We invented a machine to capture light, and in doing so we created a new light that now illuminates us. It has been a teacher, a babysitter, a propagandist, a revolutionary, a friend, and a phantom. It documented our history as it happened and then began to script it. The invention of television was never about the box, it was about the signal. And as that signal evolves from analog waves to digital bits to generative AI constructs, it continues to carry the weight of our stories, the echo of our laughter, the image of our conflicts, and the blueprint of our future. The story continues not in the living room but in the very fabric of our mediated lives. The set is off, but the show is never over. The story of television, therefore, is not one that can be concluded with a final definitive chapter. It is a living narrative, an ongoing experiment in human perception and connection. To continue is to venture beyond the screen itself and into the very cognitive and social fabric it has rewoven. We have chronicled its birth, its technological adolescence, and its digital maturity. Now we must confront its legacy and its future as a pervasive environmental force, a layer of reality as fundamental as the air we breathe. The most profound and least understood impact of television's evolution is its effect on the human brain's neuroplasticity. The rapid-fire editing, the constant scene changes, the relentless stimulus of commercial breaks, all hallmarks of late 20th century television, trained several generations to process information in shorter, more intense bursts. This was not merely a cultural shift, it was a neurological one. The brain adapted to this new information diet. Now, in the era of algorithmic streaming and ultra-short-form video on platforms like TikTok, this process has accelerated exponentially. The unit of attention has shrunk from the half-hour sitcom to the 15-second clip. The brain's reward system is constantly titillated by the promise of the next piece of content, leading to a state of continuous partial attention that makes deep, sustained focus an increasingly difficult cognitive feat. Television, in its modern, distributed form, has become a powerful, albeit unintended, tool for cognitive conditioning. We are living through a massive, unregulated experiment in how a species processes reality, and the primary agent of this change is the descendant of the humble cathode ray tube. This cognitive shift has direct and observable consequences for society. The pace of public discourse has accelerated to match the rhythm of television, even as the medium itself fragments. Political debates are no longer lengthy, reasoned exchanges, but a series of soundbites and gotcha moments designed for viral clip distribution. Complex policy issues are reduced to binary, emotionally charged narratives that fit the dramatic structure of a primetime drama. The line between news and entertainment, once a subject of academic concern, has now been utterly erased by 24-hour news channels that employ the same graphics, music, and narrative techniques as sports commentary or reality shows. The goal is no longer solely to inform, but to retain viewer engagement in a brutally competitive attention economy. This has created a public square that is perpetually agitated, where nuance is a casualty and outrage is the default currency. Simultaneously, the economic model of television has completed its inversion. The original model was simple: create content to attract a mass audience, then sell that audience's attention to advertisers. The streaming model initially promised an ad-free utopia funded by subscriptions. However, as the market has saturated, we are witnessing a regression to the mean, a hybrid model. Streaming services now introduce ad-supported tiers, and the advertising itself is becoming more sophisticated and invasive. Targeted advertising, using the vast troves of data collected on viewing habits, means that the commercials or the recommended for you algorithms are no longer a blunt instrument but a precision tool aimed at our deepest psychological predispositions. The television has become a two-way mirror. We watch it and it in turn watches us, learning our desires and fears to better sell us products, ideologies, and lifestyles. The living room is now a data mine and the content we consume is the pickaxe. In the realm of art and narrative, television's journey has been one of both incredible ascension and potential decay. The golden age of prestige television, with its novelistic depth and complex antiheroes, proved that the medium could rival and even surpass the artistic ambition of film. Shows like The Wire, Mad Men, and Breaking Bad are rightfully considered masterpieces of long-form storytelling. This era was a direct result of the creative freedom offered by cable and early streaming, which were not bound by the same content restrictions and demographic demands as the broadcast networks. Yet the current algorithmic era threatens this hard-won artistic ground. When success is measured by completion rates and the algorithm's primary directive is to serve content that keeps a user on the platform, there's a powerful, often unspoken pressure toward homogenization. The unique, the challenging, the slow-burning narrative risk being de-emphasized in favor of the instantly gratifying, the familiar, and the easily categorizable. The algorithm favors the creation of content, a fungible, data-optimized product, over the cultivation of art, which is by its nature unpredictable and resistant to categorization. The future may not be one without great television, but it may be one where great television becomes harder to discover, drowned out by a tide of algorithmically optimized mediocrity designed to be just good enough to prevent cancellation. Looking forward, the next paradigm shift is already taking shape: the complete dissolution of the medium into the environment. This is known as ambient TV. Screens are no longer confined to walls or handheld devices. They are embedded in refrigerators, car dashboards, and smart mirrors. The content is becoming continuous, context-aware, and backgrounded. You might have a live stream of a forest canopy playing on your kitchen counter as you make coffee, or a data visualization of global weather patterns on your bathroom mirror. This is television not as a destination for focused viewing, but as a dynamic layer of visual information that decorates and informs our living space. It is the final step in television's journey from a rare, communal event to a constant, personalized utility like running water or electricity. From the flickering mechanical ghost in Baird's lab to the silent, pervasive data stream of the ambient future, the invention of television has been the invention of a new human sense. We granted ourselves a collective, then a personal, and now an environmental eye. It has shown us the sublime, the Earth rising from the moon's horizon, and the horrific, the live collapse of towering landmarks. It has forged global communities and shattered local ones. It has been a mirror reflecting our best and worst selves back at us, and then it became the mirror through which we now perceive the world itself. The story of how we invented the television is, therefore, also the story of how television reinvented us. It changed our brains, our politics, our art, and our social rhythms. The question is no longer what television will become, but what we will become as we continue to live in its ever-evolving light. The signal persists, and we are perpetually tuned to its frequency, both its broadcasters and its receivers, forever shaping and being shaped by the ghosts we first taught to dance in the glass. The narrative of television, therefore, expands beyond the device, beyond the content, and into the very metaphysical question of shared experience and constructed reality. To continue is to examine the societal antibodies that have developed in response to television's dominance, the rise of conscious countermovements, and the emerging philosophical implications of a world where the broadcast and the lived experience are inseparably fused. We have moved from asking, what is on television, to what is television and what has it made of us? A significant, though often overlooked, chapter in this story is the history of resistance. Almost from its inception, the pervasive nature of television bred a cultural backlash. Intellectuals and social critics from the 1950s onward decried it as an idiot box and a vast wasteland, in the famous words of FCC Chairman Newton Minow. This critique was not merely snobbery. It was a prescient fear of the medium's power to standardize thought, pacify the populace, and erode local cultures and high art traditions. This resistance took many forms. The Kill Your Television movement of the 1980s and 90s was a literalist approach, advocating for the physical removal of the set from the home to reclaim time and mental space for reading, conversation, and community engagement. Adbusters and other culture-jamming groups co-opted the visual language of television advertising to subvert its messages, highlighting the medium's role in fostering consumerism and environmental degradation. This resistance has evolved in the digital age. The modern equivalent is the conscious practice of digital minimalism and the use of ad blockers, which are direct ideological descendants of the earlier anti-television movements. They represent a continued, and perhaps more sophisticated, struggle against the attention economy that television helped to pioneer. The backlash against binge-watching is not just about health. It is a critique of a consumption model that turns narrative art into a compulsive, decontextualized data stream, robbing stories of their rhythm and reflective power. These movements are a vital part of the story, demonstrating that the invention of television was not a one-way process of societal surrender, but an ongoing dialectic between the medium's allure and the human instinct for authentic, unmediated experience. Simultaneously, television's role in the construction of memory and history has become a subject of intense scholarly and public concern. For events from the mid-20th century onward, the collective memory is, for most people, a televised memory. Our mental archive of the Kennedy assassination, the Challenger disaster, or the September 11 attacks is composed not of personal recollection alone, but of the curated, repetitive, and often traumatic footage broadcast by news organizations. Television does not just report history, it authors the primary visual document from which history will be written. This grants broadcasters an immense and sobering responsibility. The choice of which images to show, which angles to emphasize, and which narratives to voice over the footage shapes the political and emotional understanding of an event for generations. The television has become the central nervous system of the global body politic, and the signals it carries can trigger collective trauma or national catharsis. This power is now being tested and fragmented in the era of deepfakes and synthetic media. The foundational promise of television, seeing is believing, is on the verge of being utterly broken. If the first century of television taught us to trust the moving image as a document of reality, the next century will force us to question every frame. The technology that began with capturing light now threatens to fabricate it with perfect fidelity. This represents the ultimate perversion of television's original purpose and the greatest challenge to its legacy as a tool for witness and documentation. The battle for truth will not be fought only in words, but in pixels, and the battlefield is the screen that hangs in our living room, sits on our desk, and rests in our pocket. Furthermore, we must consider television's ecological and material footprint, a story often hidden behind the glow of the screen. The evolution from the vacuum tube console to the flat panel LCD to the microLED display represents not just progress, but a trail of electronic waste. Each technological revolution rendered millions of perfectly functional sets obsolete, creating a massive and toxic legacy in landfills across the globe. The energy required to power the server farms that host streaming services is staggering, contributing significantly to the digital world's carbon footprint. The invention of television is thus also the invention of a new form of environmental cost, a physical consequence of our desire for ethereal images. The cloud has a very tangible, very terrestrial weight. Finally, we arrive at the most speculative frontier, television as a potential gateway to post-human experience. As virtual reality technology advances, the line between watching a story and inhabiting it will dissolve. The passive viewer of the 1950s becomes the active participant of the 2050s. This could represent the final, complete fulfillment of television's promise, total sensory immersion in another place, another time, another consciousness. It could be the ultimate tool for empathy, allowing us to truly see through another's eyes. Or it could be the ultimate tool for escapism, a digital opiate that makes the physical world seem drab and unappealing by comparison. From the selenium cell's faint whisper of electricity to the immersive data suits of the future, the invention of television has been a journey of externalizing our consciousness. We built a machine to project our sight and hearing across distances, and in doing so we began to project our very selves. The story of television is the story of humanity building a shared dream, a collective nervous system. It is a story of breathtaking ingenuity and profound unintended consequences. We sought a window to the world and we built a world inside the window. Now we stand at the threshold preparing to step through. The invention is complete. The consequences are eternal. The broadcast of our future, for better or worse, is still live. The story of television, therefore, is a narrative that has transcended its own medium, becoming a foundational layer of the human condition in the 21st century. To continue is to project its arc forward, to grapple with its ultimate potentialities and its existential risks. We have chronicled its birth, its technological maturation, its social impact, and the backlash it inspired. Now we must confront its final metamorphosis, from a tool we use into an environment we inhabit and potentially into a dimension of our own consciousness. We are entering the era of the biometric screen. The next evolutionary leap is not in resolution or size but in responsiveness. Future displays will not merely present images, they will read our reactions. Cameras and sensors embedded in devices will track microexpressions, pupil dilation, heart rate variability, and even neural activity through non-invasive interfaces. This data will feed back into the content engine in real time. A horror film could intensify its scares when it detects your fear is waning, or a drama could lengthen a poignant scene when it senses your deep engagement. This creates a closed-loop system of stimulus and response, a form of algorithmic co-authorship where the viewer's own physiology directly shapes the narrative. The line between audience and performer, already blurred, will vanish entirely. We will become active, albeit unconscious, participants in the stories we consume, our biometrics serving as the director's cue. This deep integration foreshadows an even more profound convergence, the direct neural interface. The ultimate screen may be the visual cortex itself. Research in brain-computer interfaces (BCIs) points toward a future where visual and auditory information can be streamed directly into the mind, bypassing the eyes and ears altogether. This would be the final dissolution of the television as a physical object. Entertainment, communication, and even fabricated experiences could be overlaid onto reality, a concept known as augmented reality or used to construct entirely immersive virtual worlds. In this paradigm, watching television would be an outdated concept. One would simply experience a narrative, feeling the desert sun or the chill of space as if they were physically present. This represents the culmination of television's original purpose, to create a sense of being there, pushed to its absolute logical extreme. The societal implications of such a technology are staggering. It promises a revolution in empathy, allowing individuals to directly experience life from another person's perspective, potentially eroding prejudice and fostering a deeper understanding of the human condition. Yet it also poses the gravest threat to a shared, objective reality. If our sensory experiences can be completely manufactured and tailored, the very concept of truth becomes personal and malleable. Political discourse, legal testimony, and personal memory could all be called into question. The power to control this neural broadcast would be the most potent form of influence ever conceived, making the propaganda of the 20th century seem crude by comparison. Simultaneously, the nature of content itself will be transformed by generative artificial intelligence. We are already seeing the nascent stages of this with deepfake technology and AI-written scripts. The next step is the infinite story engine. Imagine a television system that does not stream pre-recorded shows, but generates unique, endless narratives on the fly, tailored to your specific psychological profile and current mood. You could request a mystery set in Victorian London with a female protagonist who has a specific personality type, and the AI would generate it instantly, complete with original score and dialogue, ensuring it is perfectly paced to hold your attention. This would mark the final shift from television as a curated art form to television as a utility, like electricity, providing on-demand, bespoke experiences. It would democratize storytelling but could also devalue the creative struggle and serendipity that often produces great art. When every possible narrative can be generated, does any single narrative retain its meaning? This technologically saturated future forces a reevaluation of television's core promise: connectivity. The medium began by connecting households to a central broadcast source, creating a national community. It then evolved to connect individuals to niche global interests. Now it threatens to atomize us into billions of individual realities, each perfectly customized and isolated. The great paradox of the hyperconnected age is the potential for profound loneliness. If everyone is watching their own personally generated, biometric-optimized narrative, what do we share? What are our common myths, our collective reference points? The global village may fracture into a planet of population. 1. Therefore, the ultimate chapter in the story of television's invention may be the story of how we learn to manage its power. It will necessitate the development of a new form of literacy, synthetic media literacy, to navigate a world where seeing is no longer believing. It will require robust ethical frameworks and perhaps even neurorights legislation to protect our cognitive liberty from commercial or political manipulation. It will challenge us to consciously create new rituals of shared, unmediated experience to preserve our common humanity. From the faint glow of a mechanical scanner to the potential for a direct neural broadcast, the invention of television has been a journey of outer space becoming inner space. We sought to capture light and ended up questioning the nature of reality itself. The box we built to show us pictures became a mirror showing us our own limitless capacity for creation and our profound vulnerability to illusion. The story of television is ultimately the story of our own reflection, and we are now responsible for deciding what that reflection will become. The signal is live, the audience is the director, the broadcast of our collective future has only just begun. The story of television, therefore, has no end, only a perpetual state of becoming, a signal forever searching for a more perfect receiver. We have followed its path from a scientific curiosity to a domestic centerpiece, from a monolithic broadcaster to a personalized stream, and now to a potential layer of our very consciousness. To continue from this precipice is to project its narrative into the realm of philosophy, ecology, and ultimate human purpose. We must ask not what television will do next, but what its existence demands of us as a species. We are approaching the concept of the archaeological signal. Future historians and anthropologists will not study our era through pottery shards or stone tools, but through the vast, stratified layers of our television and streaming data. Our broadcast signals, both terrestrial and digital, have created a permanent, if ethereal, geological layer in the Earth's history. These signals, carrying everything from nightly news to sitcoms to reality shows, are an unprecedented fossil record of our collective psyche, our fears, our humor, our biases, and our aspirations. They represent a Rosetta Stone for future civilizations to decipher who we were, what we valued, and what we dreamed. The golden age of television will not merely be a cultural designation, but a literal stratum in the archaeological dig of human technological progress. The responsibility this imposes is immense. We are curating the primary source material for our own legacy, often without a thought to the permanent, broadcast nature of our digital footprints. This leads to the emerging crisis of cognitive overspecialization. Just as industrialization created a division of labor that fragmented traditional crafts, the hyperpersonalization of television and media is creating a division of experience that fragments shared cultural understanding. The algorithmic curation of content, designed to maximize engagement, funnels us into increasingly narrow epistemic tunnels. One individual's media ecosystem, filled with documentaries and in-depth analysis, can exist simultaneously with another's, saturated with conspiracy theories and outrage-driven content even within the same household. This is the antithesis of the global village. It is the global archipelago, a world of isolated intellectual islands, separated by seas of algorithmic indifference. The invention, which began by showing us a common world, now risks rendering us incapable of agreeing on a common world at all. The challenge of the next century will not be accessing information, but cultivating a shared context in which that information can be meaningfully discussed and debated. Concurrently, we must confront the paradox of authenticity. Television and its descendants thrive on the human desire for genuine connection and real experience. This is the engine of reality television, live streaming, and social media. Yet the very act of broadcasting an experience, of framing it for a camera, of performing for an audience, fundamentally alters its nature. It ceases to be an authentic lived moment and becomes a product designed for consumption. We have created a culture that craves authenticity but is constantly mediating it through a lens. This creates a deep societal cognitive dissonance. We watch vloggers for their real lives, which are carefully staged and edited. We follow influencers for their unfiltered opinions, which are crafted for brand alignment. The invention that promised to bring the world into our homes has, in a strange twist, made the real world a performance. The quest for the unmediated moment becomes the central, and perhaps unattainable, desire of the televisual age. On a planetary scale, the ecological narrative of television enters a new phase, the energy paradox of the ethereal. While the physical footprint of devices may shrink, the energy appetite of the content cloud is insatiable. The shift to higher resolutions, 4K, 8K, and beyond, the computational load of real-time generative AI for content, and the constant data transfer required for streaming, represent a massive and growing draw on global energy resources. The cloud is, in fact, a vast network of energy-intensive physical data centers. The carbon footprint of a single hour of high-definition streaming is a tangible, if invisible, environmental cost. The invention that allows us to visually appreciate the fragility of the Earth ecosystems is simultaneously contributing to their strain. This forces a difficult conversation about digital sustainability and the true cost of our endless, on-demand visual feast. Finally, we arrive at the ultimate philosophical frontier, television as a theater of the self. As technologies like VR and neural interfaces mature, the final destination of this journey is not just watching a story but inhabiting it as a customized avatar. The narrative is no longer something that happens to a character on a screen. It is an environment we enter and influence. This represents the final internalization of the broadcast. The external world of television collapses inward, becoming a playground for the exploration of identity, morality, and desire. We will be able to trial-run life decisions, experience historical events, or live out fantasies with a fidelity indistinguishable from reality. This is both the pinnacle of empathy and the zenith of solipsism. It offers the potential for profound self-understanding and the risk of catastrophic detachment from the shared physical world. The invention of television will have completed its cycle. It began as a magic window to a world outside our reach, and it may end as a magic mirror from which we may never wish to turn away. The story of how we invented the television is, in its final analysis, the story of how we invented a new way to be human, a species that can no longer be defined solely by its physical reality, but also by the boundless, flickering, and ever-evolving realities it has learned to broadcast, stream, and now to dream into being. The transmission continues. We are both the signal and the source. The story of television, therefore, finds its conclusion not in a final technological breakthrough or a silent signal, but in a profound and quiet transformation of the human experience itself. We have followed its journey from a spark of theoretical possibility to a flickering mechanical eye, from a piece of living room furniture to an invisible, intelligent stream, and finally, to a deeply personal canvas for consciousness. To end this story is to recognize that the invention has achieved its ultimate, silent purpose. It has ceased to be a thing we watch and has become a fundamental way we see. We stand now at the end of the broadcast era and the beginning of the bespoke epoch. The communal hearth, which once bathed families in the same electronic glow, has fractured into a billion points of light, each a personalized universe. The great, unifying river of broadcast television has delted into countless capillary streams, hydrating every niche interest and individual identity. This is not a failure of the invention but the fulfillment of its deepest potential, the potential to cater not to the mass but to the person. The paradox is that in achieving this ultimate personalization, the medium has dissolved. We no longer watch TV. We engage with narrative constructs, we interface with information streams, we inhabit data-driven worlds. The word television, the act of seeing from afar, has become an anachronism, for the distance has collapsed. The far has been brought near, and the near has been rendered infinite. The final, quiet lesson of television is one of stewardship. We invented a mirror that grew to encompass the world, and in its reflection we saw our collective power and our collective fragility. We saw our capacity for creation and our susceptibility to manipulation. We witnessed our genius for connection and our talent for isolation. The device, in its relentless evolution, held up a lens to our own nature, reflecting back not just images but the consequences of our choices. It showed us that a tool for unparalleled education could also be a conduit for vast misinformation, that a window to foster global empathy could also be a weapon of cultural homogenization, that a canvas for artistic masterpieces could also be a factory for mindless content. And so the story ends not with a technological prediction but with a human imperative. The invention is complete. The power to transmit sight and sound across any distance, to archive all experience, to generate any reality is now in our hands. The question that remains is not what will television become? The question is, what will we become with it? We must now learn to be the curators of our own attention, the architects of our own cognitive environment. We must develop the wisdom to discern the signal from the noise in an age where they are deliberately fused. We must find the courage to periodically step away from the bespoke paradise, to look each other in the eye in the unmediated light, and to tend to the stubborn, physical world that sustains us all. The cathode ray tube has cooled. The flat screen is but a dormant portal. The last centralized broadcast has ended. But the human impulse to tell stories, to share experiences, to see beyond our immediate horizon, that impulse is eternal. We invented the television to satisfy that impulse, and in doing so we set in motion a revolution that has forever altered the landscape of our minds. The screen goes dark, the story of its invention is told, but in the silence that follows, a new story is already beginning. It is the story of what we choose to see and who we choose to be in the light we ourselves created. The transmission ends here. The responsibility is now ours. The story of television, therefore, does not truly end, but rather transforms into a different kind of narrative, the story of its aftermath, its legacy, and its silent, enduring presence in the architecture of our minds. To continue past the point of its technological culmination is to document not the device, but the imprint it left upon the human soul. We have chronicled its birth, its meteoric rise, its fragmentation, and its dissolution into the ether of digital life. Now we must bear witness to the world it made, a world where the broadcast has ended, but its echo is perpetual. We inhabit the landscape television forged. Our political discourse, with its sound bites and dramatic confrontations, is a direct inheritance from the need to capture attention in a 30-second segment. Our social interactions are peppered with references to shared media, the last vestiges of a common culture now serving as a lingua franca in a babel of content. Our very perception of reality has been conditioned by the grammar of the screen, the quick cut, the dramatic reveal, the satisfying narrative arc we unconsciously expect life to follow. The invention did not just give us shows to watch, it gave us a lens, and we have forgot how to remove it. We see the world in frames, instinctively seeking the protagonist and the antagonist in every complex human situation, waiting for the commercial break that never comes. In this aftermath, a new cultural archetype has emerged, the curator. In an age of infinite choice, the highest value is no longer the creation of content but the discernment to navigate it. Algorithms perform this function mechanically, but a human yearning remains for the trusted guide, the critic who can sift through the endless digital silt and pan for narrative gold. This is the final, ironic evolution of the television host, from a mere presenter on a stage to a spiritual guide through the wilderness of plenty. The power has shifted from those who control the broadcast tower to those who can map the territory. The physical remnants of the television age are becoming artifacts, then relics. The massive console television sets are now retro curiosities in boutique hotels, their deep cabinets and tiny screens a source of nostalgic wonder. The satellite dishes that once dotted rooftops are rusting sculptures, monuments to a brief era of 100-channel universes. The broadcasting towers, those once proud needles scratching the sky, now stand as silent sentinels, their purpose obsoleted by the invisible, distributed network of the cloud. They are the industrial age skeletons of an information age beast. Future generations may point to them as we point to aqueducts or lighthouses, marveling at the crude but ambitious engineering required to connect a civilization. And what of the signal itself? The analog transmissions, the ghostly VHF and UHF waves that once carried the three networks into every home, have been silenced, replaced by the efficient silent flow of digital packets. That particular slice of the electromagnetic spectrum, once the most valuable real estate in the world of information, has been reallocated, repurposed for other forms of communication. The airwaves are quiet in the way they haven't been for nearly a century. The haunting, ethereal presence of broadcast television, a constant, invisible companion to the 20th century, has vanished. We have gained efficiency and choice, but we have lost a certain kind of ambient, shared energy, the hum of a nation watching together. Yet the fundamental human need that television answered, the need for story, for connection, for a window beyond our own walls, persists undiminished. It simply migrates, finding new vessels. The campfire tale became the stage play, became the novel, became the radio drama, became the television show, became the streaming series, became the immersive simulation. The container changes, but the contents remain the same. Our fears, our loves, our myths, our questions. So we end the story of television's invention here at the quiet conclusion of its physical reign. The great, sprawling, chaotic, brilliant, and troubling saga of how we learned to capture light and throw it across the world is complete. We succeeded. We built the window. We painted a million pictures on its glass, and then we stepped through. The screen is dark, the set is off, but in the reflection on the blank, black glass, we can still see ourselves, the inventors, the viewers, the children of the broadcast, forever changed by the light we learned to bend to our will. The end.